of the British monarchy, we do think of people like Queen Victoria, simply because she was around for so long and ruled, some might say, with a rod of iron. Others might suggest that she really had to, given the fact, of course, that she had a lot of children that she had to keep an eye on, and boy did she keep an eye on them. But the one that was the most difficult was, of course, well, how can I put this politely? Coin a phrase, his nickname was Dirty Bertie. He was the Prince of Wales, Prince Edward, and bottom line is that, the Queen Victoria, had this rather austere reputation. But behind the scenes, there were darker things that she had to do in order to protect the monarchy. And she decided that the only way to do that was to make sure that she kept her eye on what she considered to be the most difficult of her children. Let me explain. Lovely to see you today, and as ever, thank you so much for your time. You know what I like about stories about royal history is because you kind of think, don't you, that you know it all. And in the modern age that we live in, it's often been said that the current British monarchy, our wonderful British royal family, have a lot to contend with the world, particularly now of social media. Only recently, of course, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was more or less forced into giving some kind of admission as to what was truly wrong with her. In the old days, of course, she would have just been able to relax it out and return back to public life as and when the public accepted it. Now you are owned by the public. Or has it really changed? You see, way back in the Victorian era, Queen Victoria knew exactly the sort of reputation that her son, the Prince of Wales, Dirty Bertie, had. He smoked over 25 cigarettes a day, 10 cigars, ate exactly what he wanted, and at points his waist was tipping the barrels at 48 inches, although people daren't tell him that he put on weight. Well, Queen Victoria did, but being a rather stout person herself, apparently he would sort of fire back. Interesting, isn't it, to think that, of course, somebody would dare question the monarch. Their relationship was fractured at best, simply because, as she pointed out, he simply doesn't have enough to do to occupy himself. Now, the Prince of Wales at the time really occupied himself by going out to the world of theatre, ballet, drinking, private boxes inside hotel ballrooms, you name it, he did it. And the sort of tabloids of the day did their very best to keep up with him, all while remaining slightly on the right side of, well, being, shall we say, polite, to say the least. But nothing truly escaped the late monarch, so much so that she was very clever in how she monitored exactly what was going on in the Prince of Wales' life. You see, every day while he wrote letters to various people, yes, she was very keen on knowing that he'd responded back and dealt with the business of the day. But his private letters, which he also undertook in another study, well, every single day she would have that blotting paper removed and she could read certain things through it. They had all the techniques of the day to see exactly who was he writing to. She didn't stop there. According to sources, basically, while his letters were given to his private equerry, then they were all copied with addresses, and then the private team of people that worked for the monarch, Queen Victoria, well, they would go and basically circulate to see exactly where the letters were going, who lived there, and more importantly, who was he writing to. She very much had, her finger on the pulse, and rightly so she had to. Now, when the Prince of Wales decided that, well, he'd had a slight accident by twisting his ankle, she suggested that he went to Osborne House in the Isle of Wight, and just coincidentally, she was going to be taking a holiday there too. He thought, oh no escape. So he decided to rent a yacht just on the Solent, a little bit far away, so that they weren't exactly living in the same house and she could escape. But the very, very clever Queen basically had a radio mast installed on that yacht in a very early version of Marconi broadcasting. And there were messages back and forth. Now, he suddenly was aware of the mast, and suddenly she said, well, it was a way of keeping in contact with him. But also she had all of the crew monitoring exactly the messages that he was sending out, and more importantly, if he ever went to shore. Now, when you think about it, and you think about our current king, King Charles, he too had a very long wait, didn't he, to make sure that he ascended the throne. And as he pointed out, nobody really wants to have that because it means you losing a loved one. Of course, by the time Queen Victoria sadly demised, the Prince of Wales really wasn't exactly in the mood for being a king. He'd had a life full of frivolity, music hall, all that sort of stuff. But as a source pointed out, who's a wonderful historian that works inside the British monarchy, the story goes that Queen Victoria was one of these people that, the story is, isn't it, that we are not amused. Well, apparently that really only happened once. She did in fact like the music hall, and the one bonding connection that she had with her son was finding out all about the latest ditties, the rather raunchy songs and some of the music hall acts of the day. But the bottom line was that she said she couldn't be seen in such venues, such places of inequity, because it just wouldn't look good. It didn't look good for him, but she said that was slightly passable. And of course, once he became king, he would have to relinquish all those sort of things. As we know, he didn't. And sadly, he and his mother, although got on towards the end, were never firm or fast friends, and she was very concerned apparently about how the monarchy would end up during his short tenure or long tenure, depending on how long he lived. Of course, many people cite Prince Edward as the person who turned it around, and I've mentioned this before. He was a man, of course, that fully embraced the media of the day, motion picture making, and, was looking at all sorts of ways of reaching out to the subjects. You see, Queen Victoria could have put a little bit more faith in her son, because under him, the Edwardian era, he really did reshape the monarchy. Sadly for her though, she could never live to see it. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.